Very excited to welcome our next guest to the show, actress and singer Peppermint. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Very glad to have you on. You came very highly recommended a couple of weeks ago by one of our previous guests, Bob the Drag Queen. So we're very excited to talk to you about some of what you've been up to. And it appears that despite the fact that it's a pandemic and people can't really go anywhere, you've been up to a lot over the past few months. Is it fair to say that?
I think it's fair. All things considered, that's like the t-shirt, right, that we're using for 2020.
Exactly. So let's quickly run through just a little bit. So you're very active in a number of different circles, but just since the pandemic began, you recruited your castmates from head over heels to help raise funds for the Ali Forney Center. You're doing a virtual college speaking tour with Sasha Velour. You recently hosted the first Black Queer Town Hall with Bob the Drag Queen, and to top it off, you have a new album that is coming out next month. And I know that like everybody, like it's sort of a thing where we compete to say how little we're getting done during the pandemic, but I try to make sure that I get dressed each day. So congratulations on what you've been able to accomplish. Tell us about a few of these events.
Yeah, getting dressed is still actually a challenge for me. I won't pan down. But yeah, this is all of those things are things that it's always great to kind of look back in retrospect and be like, wow, I have been busy over the past few months. But of course, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was pretty much sitting around watching Tiger King like everybody else. Yep. And in terms of, I think one thing that's really unique about this moment in time, the pandemic, and sitting, everyone being sort of on lockdown at one point or another, is it really provided time for us to have conversations and witness certain aspects about our society that have always existed. And so when you're stuck at home and you have nothing to do but look at the internet and social media and things that are coming in, when the messages that are coming through are people being killed and beaten and murdered by the police and all this injustice, then most of us have wanted to do something about it, which is why I think the Black Lives Matter movement is credited as being one of the largest movements in American history. But yeah, I have been busy. It was so great to get my castmates from Head Over Heels back together, especially given that the pandemic has basically canceled Broadway for the next, for about a year. It looks like for the foreseeable future, which is, a major loss in jobs and revenue for the state of New York and live theater in general, all over the country.
Yeah, LA, hard hit in that area as well. My wife is an actress, and there are still jobs technically, but it's a very small percentage of what it once was. So tell me about the conversations that people have had time now to, some people are leading these conversations, some people are being exposed to these conversations. What have you made of this moment? You described Black Lives Matter as one of the most successful social movements basically in American history, and I certainly agree. It's been massive and very inspirational. But there are some people who are attempting to distract from that conversation, to twist it. That fight, has it been successful? What's being learned in your estimation?
Well, I think one thing that's being learned, obviously, that everyone has a different experience, especially when we're in the context of Black Lives Matter. Black folks and white folks in this country have very different experiences. White folks have a different experience than people of color in general at some point or another. And I think that's something that is just being brought to the surface that's more undeniable in a way that that may not have been in the past for a lot of people. I think many people were happy saying, I'm a nice person. I'm not in the KKK, and I think we should have peace for the world, and we had a Black president, so we're good, business as usual. But I think people are starting to see the systems for what they are, the systems of oppression, racism, misogyny, sexism, and then all of the subsystems like the phobias, the transphobia, the homophobia, colorism, which is a sort of racism that exists within certain communities of color. And we're seeing all of these different things. Of course, socioeconomic, disparities, which are that, and so the theme of 2020, I think, is intersectionality. People are realizing that there's different factors that affect folks differently, and that even though we all live in the same country and we all might want the same things, the ways that we can get them or the access to those things is very different for depending on who you are.
Yeah, and I've been glad to see that while there's this overarching conversation, but that it's many different groups, many different individuals, and that there has been room for conversations about some of the more specific areas dialed in that you mentioned, and one of them that I've seen, especially earlier on in the movement, was an acknowledgement that Black people are being killed, but Black trans people are also being killed at even higher rates. And 2020 is on track to be the deadliest year yet for the transgender community, despite the fact that people can't really go anywhere. Still incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was really interesting that we were able to see at the beginning of the pandemic. At least hearing stories that nature was sort of rebounding from the effects of climate control, which is something I'm hoping everyone was happy to hear, because of the impact of people was less on our environment. But to kind of juxtapose that, very early on in the pandemic and in the lockdown, there were murders. There had been continuous murders of Black trans women and trans women of color and white trans women, in general. Hearing that there's people who've been like murdered in a, left decapitated, dismembered, put in a box and dumped into the river, or a suitcase and dumped into the river, all during the pandemic, really highlighted that we can't even be protected in our own communities if we're at home or wherever we are. And I was hopeful that people would respond to these stories the same way that people have responded to seeing the horrible video of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and hearing the stories like Breonna Taylor. But I think two things have occurred to me, which is not a surprise, but seem to maintain that despite our Blackness, our feminist, our femaleness, our womanness puts us in a position where we seem to be less worthy of this attention from public. Breonna Taylor, we're still trying to figure out why can't. I know we've been talking about it. What's up? And I think that the fact that this was a woman is a factor in the situation in terms of the outcry, the outrage, and all of that. And for Black trans women and murdered trans women in general, where's the outcry? Where's the rage? What we get in place of the rage, the general rage outcry, is not only a complacency, but people looking at the videos that do surface of seeing trans women being beaten up by a group of people like we saw in Texas last year. Iadarola, which we saw during the pandemic in Minneapolis, the same city as George Floyd, being beaten up. Luckily, she wasn't murdered, but people were sharing this around and kind of making comments and laughing at it. And so it just shows that there's a lot more work to be done. And I think that the pandemic, of all of the horrible things that the pandemic has delivered to us, has just highlighted the importance of that. And I'm determined to really continue that conversation so that as we continue to talk about Black Lives Matter, which I won't stop talking about, then we will also continue to talk about the trans lives that are being taken in the wake of all of that.
For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.